The Nike Vaporfly 4 versus the Nike Vaporfly 3. What's new, what's changed, and which one is right for you? You probably clicked on this video for one of two reasons. You had the Vaporfly 3 and you enjoyed the Vaporfly 3 and you want to see what's changed in the Vaporfly 4 and is it worth the upgrade? Or, like more runners, you had the Vaporfly 3, it wasn't quite what you wanted it to be. It didn't really live up to the previous two versions of the shoe, and you want to know if Nike's resolved that in the Vaporfly 4. Well, let's get into it. As always with my versus videos, let's start with the specs. On paper, there aren't actually a lot of changes between these two shoes. Yes, the stack height in the heel of the Vaporfly 4 is slightly lower, and yes, the drop in the Vaporfly 4 is now 6 mil, though I'm going to say, based on some of the changes to the curvature of the carbon fiber fly plate in the Vaporfly 4, that 6 mil drop feels like a true 6 mil. If anything, it feels like an 8 mil drop. The 8 mil drop that's in the Vaporfly 3 did put you up on your toes, but based on how you weighted that shoe and how compressive ZoomX foam is, it could feel lower for some runners. The biggest difference you're going to notice on foot is the weight. The Vaporfly 4 is considerably lighter than the Vaporfly 3. You notice that when you pick up the shoes, but you really notice it when they're on foot. When you run in either one of these shoes, the Vaporfly 4 really stands out as a lighter shoe. The midsole in both these shoes is still full ZoomX. It's still a two-piece ZoomX midsole with a carbon fiber fly plate in between, but there are some geometry changes. The Vaporfly 3 has a little bit more toe spring in it. It has more of that falling forward, rolling forward feel that is very reminiscent of the Vaporfly Next% 1 or 2, whereas the Vaporfly 4 has a refined forefoot rocker. It's not quite as extreme. It still will roll you forward, but not in the same way the Vaporfly 3 or previous generations did. You never have that falling forward feel. And that's why from a ride profile standpoint, the Vaporfly 4 to me is much sharper. It's much more direct, much more responsive, much more agile. You can say all of that about the Vaporfly 3, but the Vaporfly 3 was more propelling. It rolled you forward much more directly. The Vaporfly 4 will do that, but it also gives you a lot more freedom to really dictate how you want to run in the shoe. And for a race flat, I think that's optimal. Moving to the outsole and contact patch of these two shoes, from a dimension standpoint, they're identical. I feel like Nike's using the same last and the same specs for both of these shoes. The biggest two changes you're going to notice are in the forefoot. Nike has gone back to that single piece of thicker rubber in the forefoot on the Vaporfly 4, and they've moved away from that waffle and perforated thinner piece of rubber on the Vaporfly 3. I'll talk more about how this changes the ride of the shoe in the ride section of this video. And in the heel of the Vaporfly 3, that tiered design for the two pieces of heel rubber is now removed. You have a much smoother piece of material back there with two smooth pieces of rubber. So for heel striking, a lot of the wear and shearing issues of shearing those two pieces of rubber off the heel in the Vaporfly 3 now should be completely gone in the Vaporfly 4. Moving into the upper, let's start with the Vaporfly 3. I really liked this upper material. I liked the way this fit. It never gave me any foot or toe issues. I ran a lot in various versions of the Vaporfly 3. I raced in this shoe. It never once gave me any issues. I actually really love this upper. However, I do know that a lot of runners didn't necessarily like it as much as I did because there was a lot of bagginess in the forefoot. Right at the base of the eyelet chain, there could be some bagginess and some scrunching. It just wasn't the optimal fit for a lot of people, especially for a narrower, low volume foot. And I do acknowledge that. Now that I've run in the Vaporfly 4 and I put this shoe back on my foot, I do notice that the feel of this upper around your foot, while it is generous, it is very comfortable, it doesn't really contain your foot as much as I think I really wanted it to. Back when I was only running in this shoe and I hadn't run in the Vaporfly 4, I never really noticed that because I liked the more generous fit of this upper coming from the Next% 2, which to me was a very overly tight race fit upper. That's what you want in a Vaporfly, but I thought this was much more accommodating. But now that I've run in the Vaporfly 4, I definitely noticed that this upper material does maintain the same generous fit in here, but it gives you a much better lockdown across the foot and takes a lot of the bagginess out. That bagginess that was at the base of the eyelet chain in the Vaporfly 3 is now completely gone in here. This upper textile, which is a woven TPU mesh material, is a one-piece material that really conforms to the foot nicely. It's very minimalist. There's a very minimal toe bumper, very minimal support around the eyelet chain, and there's more structure in the heel. But overall, it's a very nice textile that does wrap around the foot. It locks the foot in, conforms to the foot, but it's not baggy up here anymore. The generous fit, the toe box volume, the space for your toes, it's all still here. I believe this shoe's on the same last as well, so the width is the same to me in this shoe as it is in the Vaporfly 3. But this textile, again, just wraps around your foot better. The other big change is the eyelet chain in this shoe. In the Vaporfly 4, as you can see, it's a straight eyelet chain now. That is the first time we've seen that in a Vaporfly in some time. It's actually really nice. Additionally, the extra length of the tongue that was in the Vaporfly 3 is now removed, so it's not going to rub the top of your ankle like it could for some runners in the Vaporfly 3. And the biggest thing is that the tongue width now is wide enough to go past the edges of the eyelet chain. So if you run in a Vaporfly before, you know there was always an issue to get the tongue in the right place with your foot. Also with that offset eyelet chain that was in previous generations. With the straight eyelet chain, a tongue that's wide enough and is actually stout enough, there's more padding and this tongue is more substantial than really any previous Vaporfly tongue. This tongue just sits on top of your foot, the straight eyelet chain aligns to the top of your foot, and it's just really easy to get your foot into this shoe, get the tongue in the right place, and lock it down. And the lockdown in this shoe is significantly better because of these new laces. These new laces have a little bit of elasticity to them. Now, I've been really harsh on brands using elastic laces on super shoes, on race shoes, but I think Nike's done a really good job here. There's not overly too much elasticity. There's just enough to really dial in the fit of this shoe, and it works exceptionally well. Moving to the heel counter of this shoe, the heel counter in the Vaporfly 4 is essentially the same as what's in the Vaporfly 3. The biggest change you're going to notice is that this foam bumper that's back here in the Vaporfly 4 is a little bit firmer of a material. The foam in this bumper is just a slightly bit firmer. That may make the difference to actually give you better lockdown in the heel of this shoe. But if you had lockdown issues in the heel in the Vaporfly 3, this is probably going to be the same because it's fundamentally the same heel. However, because of the better fitting upper, the better lockdown in this shoe, it may make the difference to make the Vaporfly 4 actually work for you where the Vaporfly 3 didn't. Sizing and fit of these two shoes is the same. I have said I think these are using the same last. The width and the length of both these shoes is the same to me. These are both US men's size 9, which is true to size. That's what I wear in every Nike shoe. And I wouldn't want to go up or down at all in the Vaporfly 4. And if the Vaporfly 3 fits you a certain way, the Vaporfly 4 is going to fit you basically the same way, but with a better lockdown overall. Moving to the midsole of these two shoes and starting with the Vaporfly 4, this is going to be the other significant change in this shoe. Not only is the forefoot rocker geometry a little bit toned down in the Vaporfly 4, the curvature of the carbon fiber fly plate in this shoe has changed. It is still a drop in the midfoot, comes very close to the ground under the ball of the forefoot, and goes up into the toe spring. It's still a low plate configuration shoe. It's still a Vaporfly. But the change now is that the plate actually, instead of going straight back like it did in the Vaporfly 3 and previous generations of Vaporfly, it now curves up. And basically it hugs the bottom of this orange line, this top piece of midsole foam, and really comes directly under your heel in this shoe. And you can really see what I'm talking about here. As you can see in the Vaporfly 3, the back of the plate in the heel goes straight back, and there is a bunch of foam between the heel and the plate in the Vaporfly 3, whereas in the Vaporfly 4, that plate is basically right under the heel. There's a few millimeters of foam between your heel and the plate, but you're essentially on the plate. Nike did this to actually engage the ankle in the shoe, and you will notice this difference in the curvature of the plate in the Vaporfly 4. The Vaporfly 4 feels like it's now connected to your entire foot. The propulsion and the roll in your stride in the shoe now comes from the whole shoe, not just the forefoot of the shoe. And you can see that here. Traditionally in the Vaporfly 3 and in the Vaporfly Next Percent 1 or 2, the propulsion felt like it was coming from the midfoot, that curve and drop in the midfoot of the plate, and a little bit off the toe spring of the plate. Whereas in the Vaporfly 4, because of the refined curve in the midfoot of the plate, you're getting more propulsion there. You're still getting the propulsion from the toe spring of the plate, but now you're getting a little bit in the heel of the shoe. Overall, the Vaporfly 4 feels very aligned, very propulsive, and you feel it through the entire midsole. Additionally, there's another change to this carbon fiber applied plate. Not just the heel angle, but Nike's also widened the plate a little bit in the heel and the midfoot. And I think by doing that, it's changed the taper angle into the forefoot of the shoe, overall making this plate feel more substantial underfoot. Sometimes in the Vaporfly 3, it could feel very narrow underfoot, especially under the toe. It could feel like the plate was really only under your big toe when you're toeing off. I'm going to say in the Vaporfly 4 now, this plate feels like it's under your entire foot, and it feels much more substantial. You feel like there's a bigger, firmer platform now here in the forefoot, and when you're rolling forward, it feels like there's more plate material under the toes of your foot, in front of the ball of your foot, really rolling you from heel all the way off your toe in this shoe. It feels really nice. It feels much more substantial underfoot. And the last thing that really changes the ride of this shoe really is this one-piece, non-perforated piece of forefoot rubber in the shoe. It's gone back to the way the Next Percent 1 and 2 was. Nike's now moved away from this waffled and perforated, very thin piece of rubber to something that's thicker and more substantial. Where this shoe did have really nice grip, it did have really nice feel. This was a softer feel on foot and when you're contacting the ground. This shoe, again, is back to something that's much more substantial. And that makes a difference. This shoe still maintains the extra cushion that was added to this shoe. If you ever ran in the Next Percent 1 or 2, and then you ran in the 3 and you like the added cushion, the added foam, the softness of this shoe, that's still present here. However, because of this forefoot piece of rubber in here, overall this shoe just feels, again, more substantial. You get the softness, but you have a more direct, more sharp, more nimble feel underfoot. It makes a massive difference. A subtle change, but a massive difference in the ride of this shoe. Another way to illustrate this difference is to map these two shoes on my performance matrix. So if we put both these shoes on here and map them to all the areas of this matrix, you can see they're both still Vaporflies. They still both want to be in the upper end of this matrix. However, because of a lot of the changes I've just talked about in the Vaporfly 4, I think the max effort, the ability to really sprint in the Vaporfly 4 because of the curvature of the plate, because of how it now engages your ankle, because of that big forefoot piece of rubber, and overall the shoe feeling more substantial underfoot. I think on the max end, and I'm talking when you're getting in a 5K and faster pace, I think the Vaporfly 4 has much more of a sweet spot up there. Oddly, the other thing I find the Vaporfly 4 actually does much better, and I think that's because the plate is closer to the heel and the back of the foot, is steady running. It's just more comfortable for steady running. Not only is it more stable, but it just feels much more under control when you're doing steady running. Now, that could be if you're training in the Vaporfly, that could be when you're doing easy running between sets, between reps in a workout. In a race, that could be you're trying to lay back, you're trying to slow down for a water station, you're trying to get through a water station. The steady end of the Vaporfly 4 is surprisingly nicer. That's not where you're going to spend a lot of your time in the Vaporfly. No one's buying a Vaporfly to do steady running in, but the fact that it does that a little bit better, I think for those of us who train in Vaporflies, it will work for a lot of those workouts much better than the Vaporfly 3 or any previous Vaporfly ever did. As far as a verdict here, I think this should be rather obvious, but let me start by saying kind of goodbye to the Vaporfly 3. I loved this Vaporfly. I reviewed it very favorably. It was my shoe of the year in 2023. I ran and trained a ton in this. I raced in this shoe. I loved this Vaporfly. I had no problems with this shoe, and it worked extremely well for me. In fact, the changes I think they made to this shoe that made this work better for more runners, made it work for non-elite runners, I think was really well conceived in this shoe. But those changes are what also made this shoe maybe not work so well for an elite runner. And that's why we didn't see this shoe on the feet of a lot of Nike Elite athletes. And in fact, we saw a lot of them going back to the Next Percent 1 or 2 to race in because this shoe just wasn't doing it for them. However, I think with the changes to the Vaporfly 4, which I do think is a much better shoe, Nike has managed to maintain some of that extra usability that they brought into the Vaporfly 3 with the added cushion, a more generous fit, a little bit more feel underfoot, a little more substantial feel underfoot. But they've also brought back that sharpness, that directness, that nimbleness, that agileness that a Vaporfly should have. So runners that are really up on form, really well trained, like an elite athlete, should now do really well in this shoe. This should meet a lot of the needs for an elite runner. So this shoe is a combination of the Vaporfly Next Percent 1 or 2 and the 3. I would say it's a little bit closer to the Next Percent 2, but it does have the added usability from the 3, and it's gone off in a completely new direction. This is a new shoe. It's still the Vaporfly, but it feels very different, and I'm very excited to see what the future of this shoe will be over the next year or two. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.